If you think to yourself, I wish it was easier, I wish I had more support, I wish I could be more of myself at work, then welcome to the club. The reality is, FinTech is not that sexy. It is hard work, but it is super fun and fulfilling. Why? Because most of us are in a vulnerable financial position and suffer from money stress. So our job as FinTechers is to come up with solutions. Welcome to FinTech Product, the place to be for career advice for women in FinTech. I am Moni Millares, and I've built a career building digital banks from scratch, both in the UK and Southeast Asia. I strongly believe in togetherness, and I'm here to open up, share, and bring FinTech product and leadership experts together so that you don't have to start from scratch to thrive in your career in FinTech. I'm Mexican-British living in Asia, and I'm recognized as Singapore 65 FinTech product leaders and women in FinTech. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm a little bit more excited than usual because we've got Ricky Knox. Ricky and I met over 7 years ago. He is the founder of Tandem Bank. He is a serial entrepreneur. He's an amazing human being, and he's had an amazing impact in my life. Therefore, and I used to work very closely with him, sitting together, and I learned a lot from him. And there's many questions that I felt like when I left Tandem, I didn't ask him. So today we can go and ask him. So Ricky, it's a pleasure having you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Moni. No, it's fantastic to see you again. We've been in touch since, and you've had awesome success venturing off, setting up banks and the other side of the world. It's a real honor to be back here, and very happy to answer your slightly tricksy questions.
Thank you, Ricky. Okay, so I think I'll start with something that is very relevant to what's going on in the industry right now, and that you've gone through difficult times before as well. So back in 2017, we were in Tandem. We had already built the bank maybe for about 2 or 3 years or so. You had raised a lot of money, and then it was almost like overnight. Something happened, and we lost funding, and we went into crisis, and it was really, really hard. And at the same time, it was hard for you, for the whole company. And you gave me the privilege and opportunity to be working with you in the board. And I was the secretary at the board. So I had like exposure of what was going on. And I was like, A, this is very difficult. B, these guys handled this really well. So as we are seeing the economic downturn and like funding kind of drying up, what are your biggest lessons and biggest mistakes from that experience that other founders can leverage on right now?
I think there's some very specific situations there, as well as a few generalizable challenges. What actually happened was we'd secured a funding round from some Chinese investor, and after we'd signed the deal, while we were getting change control permission from the Bank of England, the Chinese party conference happened, and there was a view from the party, and this is all hearsay to be clear, we don't have facts on any of this, but that there were some risky investments going on by certain Chinese firms, and in particular in financial services and entertainment, with a concern that people were getting overextended. And so the plug was pulled post-signature, post-legal commitment on the deal. Now, obviously, we could have gone into a protracted legal battle, but not the smartest thing to do in that situation. And the situation at that point was we were ready to launch the bank. Now, we were ready with a fairly rudimentary product set. There was a lot we could have done more, and indeed did do more before we launched a year later in 2018. But I think it was sort of, if I was to say what were the lessons that came out of it, I mean, the immediate and slightly boring lesson was the learning that when you're signing contracts in China, the piece of paper doesn't mean much. When the cash arrives, the deal's done. When the deal's in practice irreversible, then you've got a transaction. But in addition to that, I think there were some things that led up to that Chinese transaction, which we could have done better. And if we just compare, because at that point, up till that exact transaction, we were very much leading both Starling and Monzo. We'd raised more money. The thing we had not done is we've not launched a prepaid card. So I'm going to generalize this in a moment, but Monzo went ahead, despite the fact that it had some regulatory risk of and the regulator had been clear they wouldn't look very kindly on us already operating under someone else's e-money license, but they'd gone ahead and launched a prepaid debit card into the UK market. Therefore, we're, building their early, tens of thousands of customer base. Meanwhile, we had 10,000 co-founders who are helping us build the bank, but it's not quite the same thing as serving them, a debit card, etc. So, if I were to generalize, one, just get that product out in the customer's hands as early as possible. But two, also be careful that, remember as an entrepreneur, it's your responsibility to completely ignore anybody who tells you can't do anything and prove how you can do it. Because the fact is that, we were told we couldn't launch a prepaid card. It would negatively harm our banking license. Monzo did it and they didn't lose their banking license. They didn't get their license till after us. But there've been, hundreds of cases in my entrepreneurial career. Most of the time I turn around and say, no is not the correct answer. I know you may not think you're capable of doing it, but we are going to do this. Yeah. And there were probably 50 of those moments at Tandem as well. I'm starting with, don't be stupid, you can't launch a bank, which I said no to. But no. So I think there's, I wish I'd stuck a little closer to my guns there and particularly with regulators, any external dependency, in fact, if we're trying to generalize this for founders, A, trying to avoid those external dependency. B, when you have them, think of shortcuts, think of ways around. B, before the problem accrues, just be going, okay, shit, if this takes 6 months longer than they say, whether it's a supplier or a partner or anything, what are my 4 other options? Or where are my outs? How can I get out of this situation? How can I make that person not in my critical path? And frankly, even start some of them. Obviously resources are always tight, but if you see something that's looking optimal, I have an example from an entrepreneur I was talking to day before yesterday, who, again, he started with a sort of critical back-end supplier, and they were running about a month behind, but it smelled bad. It looked like it could be 6 months behind. He was going to run out of money, completely go bust. He started a little sort of skunkworks project with 2 of his best devs working on an alternative, which was brand new, super risky, product, had no customers, but was an alternative. And as it happened, it did go on an extra month and a half, and they ended up launching with the brand new startup as their back end. And it seems to have, well, it's a little early to tell, but seems to have worked so far. So I think that, that was generally there's a more generalizable lesson there, which was sort of get out there and make sure customers using your product, make sure you're learning. And it was only indirectly connected to that collapse. And the collapse is based on the fact we told the regulator we're about to launch. Regulator said, wait till we see the money in the bank. Yeah. We're all ready to go. And then suddenly it was like, actually don't have this cash. And the challenge was, our bank balance was super low. The regulator was saying, actually potentially lose your banking license. At least we're going to suspend the process for you right now today. So, suddenly we went from having a bank license with restrictions, nearly having the 50 million in the bank that we need to launch it, and, having the product ready and the team ready, to having no banking license, having no money, and having far too large a team to actually sustain for even a few months and go out and raise a new round of funding. So that was the difficult experience that you described. And you've got to be sanguine in those moments. I think experience makes it never makes it any more fun, but makes it more at least manageable to understand you're going to get through it. You do have to be, brutal and fast and cut deeper than you think you need to cut, and all these horrible things when circumstances change. And it is one of those moments in the market right now that if you're caught in the wrong point in your funding cycle, and you might need to trim to make sure that you've got enough runway. In my case, I'm pushing, in the business I'm working on to bring forward MVP by 3 months, which is, everybody's screaming, but in my view, 6 months ago, we could have raised a seed with no MVP in market. Now, if we're going to raise a seed, we need an MVP in market. Even if it's a bit shit, it needs to be working. We need to have customers. We need to be showing some traction metrics. Because it used to be the case you could raise a seed with no traction, but actually I don't think that's the case anymore in the current environment. So yeah, Hope that's helpful lessons.
I was like, oh my God, this took me back to my times in Tandem that I would just learn by sitting next to you and listening to you. I'm like, yeah, that is so true. But actually, what you say, it's like about, basically I summarize that as well as thinking of everything that can go wrong and plan for that. I do that a lot, let's say at work for the big projects. I'm like, this will go wrong and that will go wrong. Oh, Monica. I'm like, I need to think about it because it's likely it will go wrong. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But when it does, you're kind of already prepared for it. So it's not such a big
exactly. And it's not focusing on those outcomes and you don't want to focus the organization on those outcomes because it's a slightly depressing process, but it's thinking about them and planning for them.
Yes, exactly. It's about planning in advance.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Moving on to more light topics. So you and I remember, you are a very charismatic leader and CEO. You talk to everyone, right? In the company. And yes, you do. And then I remember either we were in the pub or the kitchen. And at some point you mentioned about a book that you wrote a long time ago, either about happiness or wisdom. And we were just talking about it before the episode, that it's about basically finding your path in life. I was like, oh, that is such a big topic, such an important topic. So can you expand on what were your thoughts? Like just the key thoughts of that book?
Yeah, well, wrote it around the time I was turning 30. And I was in an MBA and at the time I'd been sort of a consultant at VC and I was sort of figuring out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I went and read loads and loads of books, like 50 books, and none of them were really helping with the right combination of sort of logical process and sort of, if you like, wisdom and spiritual inclusion. So, there were logical books about how do you maximize the amount of money you're making in your life. And there were spiritual books that sort of were like, blah, sit there and meditate and hope it comes to you. But there wasn't a logical book that said, what are the steps 1 to 10, which is how I like to think, that then drove through to taking into account spiritual outcomes and things. Yeah. And the nearest thing I found was actually a book called What Color is Your Parachute, which is totally generalizable, written ages ago by some American guy who's, it's sort of like, do you want to, be a cabinet maker or, a gardener or whatever? It's not a business book at all. So what I did was I recast, not exactly that book's process because it was a bit different, but for a sort of MBA type logical mind to just try and structure sort of search for your path in a way where you were taking into account your kind of spiritual development, your wisdom, where you wanted to get to with what were your real objectives in life, and not just the objectives that you maybe thought you had but the objectives that you sort of underlying were consistent with your beliefs and your values, and maybe a bit more about where you came from, and some process involving talking to your parents and other people who are older and perhaps further along that journey had different perspectives from you. So gathering all that information and then working through a process of sort of how you wanted to trade off these various sports, because if you want to, pursue spiritual wisdom and at the same time become the richest man in the world, those are probably pretty tricky and incompatible outcomes. You've got to prioritize, what's most important, what's next important, what's important after that, including sort of family, kids, relationships, and all this other stuff. And there's, obviously there are certain examples of people in the world, I don't know, say Bill Gates, who would probably pursue, money and success pretty unequivocally for many years, and then flipped at a point in their life to sort of pursuing a bit more wisdom and purpose in their life. Mm-hmm. But I think if you talk to the young Bill Gates, he probably wasn't very purposeful. He was probably very, very obsessed on winning and all that stuff, which is no problem. But unfortunately, that path isn't, the path of, hey, I'll be a successful billionaire and then piss around for the rest of your life isn't open to many people. It's a sort of 1 in a billion path rather than arguably 1 in the entire world's population path, maybe 2 or 3 in the world's population. But, and in fact, somebody like, in a way, Mark Zuckerberg is probably more typical, which is, he's still busting his ass 100%, on Facebook, still pursuing fame and glory, money, it's probably less important now, but through that path. So just taking all these things, recognizing and thinking about the people you want to work with, the people you want to surround yourself with, because your path, if you have certain objectives, maybe it's harder to surround yourself by the people you want to be surrounded with and the place you want to live in. What adventures do you want to have in your life, and try and mix those things up in the right brew, and then take the right steps, and also be cognizant of what you have, what you're good at, and what you don't have, and what you're not good at, so that you can also adjust those expectations a little bit in terms of what you can make happen. Yeah. But as you know, and you're a discipline of, self-help's the wrong word, but to self-advancement and wisdom seeking, and you can make most things happen if you focus on them. That the problem is most people don't spend any time thinking about where they want to be, and so they don't therefore achieving those goals. And those goals are as much about how you spend the next 5 minutes, how you spend the next hour, how you spend the next year. And putting everything off. The whole point about finding your path is it's a path. It's not a destination. The destination's important, but actually the path is almost more important than the destination, because you may end up somewhere slightly different at the end, and you don't want to have wasted all your time. Enjoy the path.
Yes.
Take it out.
Yes,
that was what it was about.
I love that. And I like the idea of exactly focusing on the path rather than the destination. And also, probably it happens to people, but it's happened to me. Sometimes you think you want something, and then you start going in the path, and then you're like, oh, actually, I don't want that. I thought I wanted that, but I don't want that. And then you have to revert. Totally. And you just have to deal with that. But it's part of the path.
Exactly.
And talking about path. So when I think Ricky Knox, the 3 words that come to my mind are passion, leader, and impact. It's kind of Ricky is all about impact. If I want to build a business of impact, I'm like, Ricky, that's the guy. So how did you reach to that place of it's important for me to have impact, and how do you merge both business and impact?
So I suppose there's 2 different bits to that. The first one is sort of how did I get there? And then I suppose, how do I think about balancing those? Because I don't really subscribe to the, hey, if you maximize impact, you're automatically successful in business. There are very few situations where I think that those are totally aligned. They aren't necessarily opposite directions, but they're just slightly different angles. So how did I start thinking about it? And first, my aunt was a big influence. My dad's sister's now dead, was a sort of environmental activist, and what she did was she was one of the leaders in the world's straw bale housing movement. So building straw bale houses in the developing world, turning around up in communities, sitting in a big circle, having a sing song, and then putting a house up in about 3 hours, which you can do with straw bales. And it's very suitable in extremely hot climates, and also weirdly in extremely cold climates. And then you plaster over the outside of it. They're actually in plastic bags to prevent termites and things jumping into your hay bales, but steel rebar. It's super cheap as well. You can put the house up for $5,000 or something. So yeah, that was a big thing. She built some charity, but she was a sort of deeply spiritual lady, and strongly was early in thinking what everyone else thinks is pretty obvious now, which is, we're not really living in harmony with this planet, and we need to work on managing that a lot better than we are today. And so I found her quite inspiring in terms of, and it's interesting because, I'm sort of heading on a more environmental path now, but actually previously it was a more generalized purpose, and actually poverty was a more important issue for me historically. And I did a lot of work in various developing countries, but I think there was so that was sort of one of the instigators. I think, I knew that I wanted to start my own business. My dad's family is also very entrepreneurial. Various people have started businesses, various points. And actually, ironically, one of my mum's family pointed out that there was this thing called venture capital, which sort of was looking at lots of companies. And actually, if you're going to start one, you might as well go and get a bit of pattern recognition, learn how other people are doing them and how that all works. And so how you design a decent business strategy. And I've been in strat consulting, which theoretically taught me some of that, but didn't really. And so then when I left business school, I was looking for something that combined an opportunity to go and see parts of the world that I'd already traveled to, but equally, felt that I could have more impact in. So having impact and changing lives, and particularly reducing poverty in the UK is quite tricky because people aren't that poor. And actually the upside from an extra 20 quid a week is probably, very different from an extra 20 quid a week in certain African countries and certain part of the more developing world, certainly at the time. And so after business school, I started GSM Systems, which is building bringing telecoms to some of the developing world. We're actually recycling and reusing old mobile network infrastructure out of Europe and the States and installing to South America, Africa, developing Asia, and actually mobile telecoms had a massive impact on poverty alleviation. Because it was first introduced, a lot of these countries didn't have normal telephone networks, so they sort of leapfrogging, and actually the ability to communicate, might save you 10 days travel. The old sort of classic adage is, you'd have to take your vegetables to market, if the price was bad, and you just had to sell them anyway, because they would go off before they got to the next market town. If you could call the nearest 5 market towns, you could then figure out where to go that we'd get decent price for your veg. Yeah. And so, built that business. But I suppose that was the beginning of my sort of purpose journey, which was, quite very specific. And I just found that it was much more motivating, particularly if you're building something which is hard, much more motivating building something that is going to have a direct impact on, hopefully, millions of lives. And I think we did in GSM. And so since then I've been moving that across into, tech, FinTech through Tandem, Digital Bank, and now on into pensions. Yeah, more focused on the UK because I've got kids in the UK now. So international travel and helping people on the other side of the world has a certain balance. Again, come back to the path and balance between, spending time with them and investing in them and helping people on the other side of the world.
Awesome. Cool. So I think you have a secret. Well, I'm exaggerating, but culture. The culture in Tandem was almost magical. Of course, I am biased because I loved it, but other people also liked it, right?
Well, we missed you. There was a massive alumni reunion, which I think was a bit of a tribute to our culture. We all got together at the Albion about 2 weeks ago or something. We're probably, Georgia would have invited you if you'd been in country, but we had about 120 Tandem alums, and it was super fun. Yeah, really. No, it wasn't. A lot of people said the same thing, which is, I do think we had a great culture, which was super important.
Yes. How did you do it? What was your secret? Because many people say culture, it's everybody's responsibility. It's top down and bottoms up and blah, 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 blah. But I do believe after working with you, that culture, it comes from the big leader. How did you go about building that culture? Because everybody has it was somewhat magical without trying to use a cheesy word, but it was super cool.
So, there's 2 things. The first one is, particularly if you're building a business, you're going to be coming to work for very long periods, and you're going to be investing your time and coming back to your path a bit. You want to be hanging out with a group of people who you find interesting, intelligent, and part of what sort of guides my choices in terms of business I build as well is building businesses where there's going to be dividends to intelligence, because you don't want to, again, go back to matching sort of, what you want. I think, if you go and build a business, in construction, for example, there's very little dividends to intelligence. So you'd probably be highly ineffective by hiring a load of intelligent people for a construction business, because we infer any competitive advantage. Whereas I think financial services is suitably complex. Digital technology is complex. The combination of technology and financial services is super complex. And so, you do need smarter people and people who can enjoy, spending time with. I think that the answer to how, culture is, I'm a big believer in that, people are who they are, and people change over time a bit. But, it's the same for relationship advice. It's like, don't go and marry someone or,
try to change
friend them in the hopes that they're going to be a different person at some point in the future. They are who they are. Yeah. So really the only way you control culture in an organization, in my view, is through hiring. And so I interviewed everybody at Tandem, and obviously you then create artifacts and traditions and story that then promote the culture and make sure that, and frankly, from my own perspective, first of all, creating an environment in which people can feel comfortable to fail, so you can try new things and innovate, but also a culture in which people feel safe and happy, also where they actually do know their colleagues and have some friends in the organization, because ultimately, that just makes everything a lot easier. It's so much easier to communicate with people who you like and you enjoy spending time with. So actually promoting people, building those bonds, and those bonds, they're harder to build now remotely. I think
Yes.
do need to, but as I'm building, new businesses, I think I'll push really hard for at least in-person social events, because interestingly, the in-person social events are the bits where you're building the relationships, and then they can carry over into a, transactional Zoom conversation and the negotiation of some resource, whatever you're working on. But I think, I think the first thing is selection, and that's probably the most important thing. Then I interviewed everyone, and then second thing, I was clear about what I was looking for, and then and that link back into purpose as well, which is, and then there's obviously, how you reward people. And so we had our values as part of the review process, and how, people were specifically, looked at how they were performing, both in terms of output, but also in terms of how they were getting there, but behaviors, which is common, but then also in terms of why and how they were displaying purpose and what they did, and the company's purpose and what they did. And I think that, the fact that people know that on the way in means that, you're choosing people who value that purpose, and therefore who are turning up into work, not just to make money for themselves and optimize their outcome. Because if, those people are going to be, harsher to work with. A lot of the big banks have been characterized by a lot of very selfish actors, often very intelligent, very able, but very selfish actors doing, and creating an environment where, you're trying your best to align those misaligned incentives and make sure that them selfishly doing their best to enrich themselves drives the performance of the organization. And it does work really well in certain instances. In a trading floor, it's amazing. There's also collaboration situations where that breaks down, and building technology is not really an area where that approach works particularly well. So basically being clear about what you're looking for, reflecting, most important. And then to some extent, how you assess and promote and reward people as well. And being honest, also occasionally getting rid of people. And I wouldn't name any names, but there were, some people who we got it wrong on the way in, and they weren't a good match for the organization, and therefore, they would be happier somewhere else. So we, making those moves, we need to make them as well, which is the unpleasant side of any type of business building.
Yeah, but that's important too, because if you keep them for too long, then it kind of starts damaging the nice rules that you
exactly
have
the culture. Exactly. Yeah, I've just recently been working into a company where it's very funny, because the CEO, I went to say what business was, but it's like, oh god, it's really difficult. I don't know why everyone seems to hate each other, and don't know what's happening here. And I was pretty honest with him. I was just like, look, mate, the level of like mistrust and thing, this has to be you. There's no other way that this many people could be in quite such a political and poisonous mood without this coming from you. You need to think really hard about what you're rewarding, what makes you praise people. Are they being rewarded for kissing your ass? Is that the primary, sort of positive outcome that you're asking people to do? Because it feels like one of those environments where it's pretty toxic, and that isn't because you hired a load of toxic people, if I'm honest, because you just don't get huge groups of toxic people. That's probably something in the way you're behaving and leading. Yeah, it's definitely it's a challenge, but made a lot easier if you've got the right people in the room.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, you also are an investor. So you're a multifaceted personality. So you are an investor. Other than, of course, looking at a good business, what do you look at when you're looking at the founder team? Either the founders or the founding team.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's there's lots of different things to look for, and so it depends which stage of the business. And but I do a lot of pre-seed investing, which is sort of super early. And I think probably there's a level of intelligence, which is this person, intelligence and decision making, which aren't exactly the same thing, which is this person smart enough to think through the right answer, or at least the best answer for now, and then decisive enough to actually to run with that until it becomes the wrong answer, and to be open enough, criticism and self-development, that they can detect when something has become the wrong answer, not to get their ego locked up with the current strategy of the business, so that they can pivot, because, many companies will have to pivot along the way. And so I think, that sort of intelligence and decision making is probably one of the most important. And the second one is maybe this isn't the right criterion. I was recently looking at my portfolio and the things I turned down, and I realized that actually I'm not that great at investing. But I missed a lot of good ones. But the other piece is passion and sort of excitement about the project, because you're going to be living through some tough times, and if you're not passionate, if you don't believe in what you're doing,
Frank, will not survive.
You're going to lose interest, and you're going to quit at some point. And the worst thing for an investor is, you've hit, hard times number one, and it's going to be hard times number 1, 2, 3, 4, and they go, actually, I'm going to go back to my day job. I can't be bothered. And that requires passion, persistence. It's hard to judge persistence when you're meeting an entrepreneur. But more recently, I've started doing, because I'm less good at figuring out exactly what's going to win and not, doing a lot more small checks. So essentially backing a lot more people. So when you're looking for a company, you're looking at sort of team first, then sort of TAM, which is a combination of business model and addressable market, size and growth, and a whole lot of different pieces, how monetizable and sustainable the business can be. And then traction, have they actually demonstrated that they can access this market and drive results in it. And often in pre-seed, you may only have team there, but ideally you've got team and TAM, but even in certain instances, I'll invest just on a team basis, because I figure they'll actually move their business model, and I'll tell them if I'm doing that, which is like, look, guys, I think you've got the business model slightly wrong. This isn't going to work, but look, I'll give you a small check and see how it goes. So and I do think team composition and not just having one person is quite important as well. I've just seen a situation in one of my portfolio companies, and she's seen the guy on Friday, but he had 3 co-founders, had to fire one of them, and then the other one quit, and things were hard, and the business model, despite a load of great desktop analysis, just didn't work the way it was. A B2B sales model didn't sell in the way they thought it would, and it's clear that while the entrepreneur was actually keen and passionate enough, actually his team were not engaged enough. They were older, they were very experienced, but actually they weren't really dedicated to this idea. They just quite fancied doing a startup, and this guy offered them some equity and it sounded good. Watching out for those things is definitely challenging, but equally super rewarding when you do find the right guys or girls.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because probably now it's kind of in and trendy to be in the startup world. And many people want to jump from corporate to startup, but it's not easy. It's quite demanding. Exactly. It's exciting, yes, but it's also demanding. And like you said, you'll have blocker 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And as a founder or co-founder, you're investing in the long term. It's not like, I'll go there a year and then leave. You have to grow the company properly. So that's a very good point. Really, really good point.
Yeah.
Talking about difficulties, how do you and I have this in common. We have a lot of energy. We just have a lot of energy, but still we're human. And we need to manage energy and health and all that stuff. What are your health practices to ensure that you don't burn out and continue with high level of energy?
Yeah. So, I am super boringly, but I run every morning. It's not, I'd like to actually find a better way to exercise here. I went a bit more time off. So I actually went and did a load of ski touring, walking up mountains, although it turned out I wasn't quite fit enough to walk up lots of mountains. I also messed my knee up, but I spent 3 weeks walking up mountains, and which was super fun and beautiful. But actually it turns out I need better fitness regime if I'm going to do that next year. I need to get my knee better, but running every morning, which I still do, kind of 6 office 5-6 days a week is just the easiest thing to do. And actually, I've been trying to cycle around London as well. So I was, when we were hanging out, I was either riding my motorbike or electric bike.
I was about to ask.
And I still have the motorbike, but I've taken the motor off my electric bike to cycle and actually try and improve my fitness levels a little bit. So I cycled here today, and I'm getting around London by bicycle mostly. It'll be a month or two when it gets a bit too hot, and I may have to revert to my motorbike. But at the moment, it's pretty nice. So yeah, that's most of it. Although I think I could upgrade that, and I think maybe I need to incorporate a bit of yoga and some other angles on my exercise regime, because just doing hill sprints every morning is it's a little mono. I need a little more variety.
Yes, that makes sense. But it's like exercise is your thing then, to keep the energy.
Exactly. And as you said, I think I'm lucky in that sort of natural, I have quite a lot of energy. And I suppose the other thing is sleep, and making sure that actually, even if I have a few nights with less sleep, that I do get a chance to, catch up, get to bed super freaking early, and rebalance on the sleep front.
Yes, that's a good point, because it's a downside of being passionate about something. and you get too passionate, and then sometimes it can be hard, and then you just have to work on the workout, and you just all of a sudden it's late, and then all of a sudden it's late the next day, and then the next day, and you're like, oh, I need to sleep.
Exactly. And it's just finding that time to catch up and making sure you almost schedule it in if you haven't managed to sort it out anyway.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I've been reading, or listening TikTok and podcasts. Sleep has much more impact on our health than the priority that we usually give it. Usually we're like exercise, food. Well, actually sleep is sometimes even more important.
Yeah, no. And I'm lucky I can normally sleep, but sometimes, as you say, I don't prioritize it enough. So just making sure that I have some catch up time, because I can, if you give me one night of like 13, 14 hours, I can make up for 4 or 5 nights of not quite enough, which is lucky. I'm flexible that way. So yeah, that's the other bit.
As we approach to the end of the episode, I'll ask you about women in FinTech. What are your thoughts about creating FinTechs where women can thrive?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's funny because it's sort of a hypercritical issue, and it's very funny because, and obviously the challenge. I mean, the tech is a big challenge. The fin is a bit less of a challenge, but you combine fin and tech, and you've got way lower female participation right the way across the board. And so, and obviously on the engineering front, historically there's just been a lot less female computer scientists coming out of universities, and so the sort of stock of people who you can hire on the engineering side is very limited. And the interesting thing is, I do think that first let's talk about affirmative action, if you like. I mean, it's funny because conferences have had an interesting knock-on effect. So, for example, like when Lumby sends, but Mike used to get quite annoyed because they were like, Mike, we really want you to come and speak. We want Asma to come and speak at our conference, but actually we want a woman because we've got enough men and we don't want. So you can't speak. We'd like Dora or Marta or one of your sort of co-founders or senior ladies along, because we need women on our panels. And actually that has driven I think an awareness, and certainly today even walking to a VC with a leadership team that's all white and male, like, you look stupid. Like, there's somebody who's judging you the moment you walk into that meeting going, I'm not sure I can invest in these guys. I mean, even worse, white, old and male. I mean, but it is. I mean, honestly, the affirmative prejudice is very, very, very strong at the moment, and so I think that's good. I think that's super positive. I've had conversations with VC describe teams as uninvestable because they don't have any female representation, which is not something I would have heard 5 or 10 years ago for sure. And so I think there's lots of positive change afoot. But how do you create a culture that's sort of welcoming and safe and feels? Yeah. And I think the one of the key challenges is again, it's back to who you're hiring, and there's a certain sort of male cultures, and traditionally sort of stockbrokers and people like this, where a sort of very high level of aggression and sort of what may appear as sort of joshing or, sort of, in jokes are fine. But actually a lot of that stuff is, is pretty tough on anybody, on men as well, more introverted men as well. And if you're building, I mean, frankly, if you're building a technology company, it's actually quite interesting because some of the things that engineers need to thrive are often similar things that you need to build a culture where women can thrive. Because, if you have a culture where safe space, if you have a culture which is very confrontational, and don't get me wrong, there's some engineers who can be very, autistic, but yet super confrontational. But equally, I think somewhere where you allow voices to be heard, you allow for introverts as well as extroverts in the team to actually have the time and space to speak up, and ultimately somewhere where some of the strengths that women bring to the table are openly recognized as well in terms of actually, certainly when we're building, teams, and whether they're squads or scrum teams or whatever it is, having a mix of even 2 women in a scrum team is super important, because actually they will almost, and they will change the composition of the discussion and the way in which the overall team behaves. And actually, they're just much better behaved. It sounds a bit stupid, but those sort of mixed male female teams. I mean, I don't know. I've not ever had enough women to have only women teams. I think they can probably be badly behaved as well in a different direction. But I think that mixed team composition is super important, and it keeps everybody, the standards of behavior at a certain level. And it's just suddenly thinking of like Trump and suddenly what he felt was acceptable. But in politics, there's been historically a sort of level of a very clear norms, and obviously in back rooms they weren't always acceptable, but in the sort of front office, and when in public, everybody used to have some certain codes of conduct. But Trump's gone and trashed those. You need to have codes of conduct that aren't Trump, that are a bit more Obama, that allow people to, where it's just not okay to insult people or comment on certain stuff, so everybody just feels safe and happy. And that doesn't just apply to women; it applies to LGBT, other minorities, whether they're minority beliefs or, religions, or, there's a whole load of different stuff you just need to take account of. And that's, I think people are much more cognizant of it than they were. And certainly, in my sort of founders groups and things, I think that the general view, even though founders are still primarily male, is, people are very much in the camp of this needs to be created, where we're creating a safe space for everybody and allowing for the benefits of that diversity, as well as frankly allowing us to hire and retain people in today's day and age. Anybody under 30, and the tolerance for any of that crap has definitely decreased on the male and female side.
Yes, that was a very insightful answer. Thank you, Ricky. I'm very conscious of time. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you in the show. Thank you so much.
It's been absolutely fantastic to see you. And look forward to hearing more about your next chapter and seeing whether we can collaborate on you bringing digital banking to more parts of the world. I'm mainly focusing on fixing UK pensions next, but when I'm done with that, a bit of saving the planet from a environmental perspective, and certainly cheering from the sidelines as others go and continue the digital banking revolution would be fantastic. So look forward to talking about that more in the future. Let's look up a date.
We will. Thank you, Ricky. Thank you, everyone. Have an amazing day and see you next week. Hello again. It's been an absolute pleasure. I learned tons from this conversation, and hopefully you gained some insights, knowledge, or inspiration. It could mean the world if you follow, share, and rate the show, because it gives me feedback. And remember, if you have FinTech, product, career, or life direction questions, reach out. I'm always happy to help. Go to my LinkedIn page, Monica Millares, and send me a connection request, DM me, and book time for a free mentoring session. See you next week. Ciao, ciao.